community practice, social change, and culture. He is active in many justice organizations and is a sixth-term Kalamazoo commissioner. Don has had so much interest in our community. I lived in this area for a long time. He confronts and he does social justice. One of the things I think I remember him most for was helping with the Kalamazoo Living Wage Coalition, the poverty reduction, and the Kalamazoo communities and schools in which he has been most instrumental. In 2008, he ran in our city for United States Representative of Michigan against Republican Fred Upton. His topic today is what I asked him to speak on, justice for all and what he does. He does it better. He's been a friend of mine for over 20 years, and I'm proud to introduce Professor Cooney.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Pat. I'm going to see what that microphone for.
Oh, God.
Okay, so Pat asked me to talk about some aspect of justice. So what I thought I'd talk about is the devastating consequences of inequality in our society. You know, I'm sure that a lot of us this week got a chance to watch at least some of that Ken Burns series that was on PBS about the Roosevelts. And how interesting it was, because that was a time when the pendulum shifted in a different way. It shifted to try to rebuild the middle class in this country. Because we've always had a huge struggle in this country. If you read the Declaration of Independence, it starts out with, we hold these truths self-evident, all people are created equal, endowed with inalienable rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. That's the ideal. That's what we talked about. But Martin Luther King said one time, if you don't have a job that pays a living wage, that's an empty promise and a lie. And you know, throughout our history, the struggle has been to realize that promise. And when the beginning of the last century, the 1900s, we were far from that promise. And in 1900, 1% of the population took home 50% of the income. About 90% of people lived in poverty. But we organized at that time, particularly labor organized, and began to fight for the rights of ordinary people. And things began to change. And we were able to get some progress. And that progress continued until the 1920s, after the First World War, when business and powerful people again got hold of the country. And ordinary people began to lose again. But then things collapsed. The economic system collapsed with the Depression in 1929. And nobody knew what to do. But then Roosevelt was elected, and he promised a new deal for ordinary people. And what he wanted to do was to restructure the whole system. He wanted to give ordinary people a better chance to live. And he did that in a lot of different ways. He did that in the social welfare programs that he put in place, like Social Security. He did it also through the passage of the Wagner Labor Relations Act, which guaranteed people the right to organize. And within the next 3 years, 5 million more people joined unions. And so between the time of, say, 1932 and up to the end of the Second World War in 1945, the middle class grew. And it continued to grow into the 1970s. And if you looked at charts about the distribution of income in that time, it was the bottom 20% that did the best and the top 10% that did the worst. But things began to change in this country in the late 1970s and into the 80s. And it began to change because public policy began to change. And instead of setting up policies that favored the middle class and the expansion of the middle class, they put in place policies that we're favoring the richest people in the country. And we've never changed since then. We've never changed. And then, since the 1980s, there has been a dramatic shift in wealth back to the top percent. So that now, the top 1% of the country is taking home as much income as they did in the early 1900s. And for the average working person, they have gained about 7% in their income in the last 30 years. It's not that our wealth and income in the country hasn't grown. Our country, the gross national product has continued to rise. But ordinary people aren't sharing in that growth. And today, we have tremendous problems in this country. I'm a city commissioner here in Kalamazoo, Pat said. I've been a city commissioner here for 17 years. And I look around at this city, which is a beautiful city, has 4 colleges here, has a wonderful symphony, has beautiful parks. And yet 44% of our kids live below the poverty line. And if we look at African American kids, it's over 60% of our kids live below the poverty line. Now, living below the poverty line for a child has enormous damage. A friend of mine by the name of Jim Henry, who teaches here and is a specialist in child trauma. And there have been studies that are going on right now at Harvard and around the country about what poverty does to kids' brains and the damage that stress does to a child's brain. And so when we have so many of our kids living in poverty in Kalamazoo, is not much different from what's happening in other major cities in the United States. We have kids who are being damaged, who will not succeed like the kids that come from wealthy families. And that's going to take an enormous toll in this country. Because inequality, the inequality in our country, not only is about income and about wealth, it's also about what happens to us as people. Judge Louis Brandeis, Supreme Court judge, said one time, you can have democracy or you can have great inequality in income, but you cannot have both. And that's what we got right now. Look at how much money is being spent on elections. The tremendous, enormous amount of money. And that money is being spent so that the people that have money can have their issues on the agenda, not the issues of ordinary people. I ran against Fred Upton twice for Congress in this area. I spent $115,000 on my election. Not my money. People gave me that money. I don't have $115,000. But it's true. When I spent $115,000, Fred Upton spent $2.3 million. For every dollar I spent, he spent 34. And the money that he spent wasn't coming from people in his community. It was coming from major corporations. Corporations who were going to be affected by the subcommittees that he was in charge of. And they gave him that money, and they knew that he would answer the phone when they called. And that's what's happening in our country now. And we have to change it. If we care about this country, we just said the Pledge of Allegiance, which says that we really care about this country. But if we really care about this country, we're going to do something about inequality. This nation, which has a $15 trillion annual economy, has the highest poverty rate among its children of 34 most industrial nations in the world. This nation is wasting the human talent of our people instead of investing in the human and the physical infrastructure of our country, we're investing in the major corporations. And the myth is that as the wealth of the country increases, we'll all do better. But the wealth of the country is increasing, and we're not doing better. We're not doing better because when the wealth increases, it doesn't say anything about how that wealth and income is distributed. We've done better in this country. We have, between 1945 and about 1977, we kept expanding the middle class. By 1934, by 1984, we had about 35% of our people in unions. Now we have about 11% of our people in unions. And when working people don't have organized strength, their issues get pushed to the side. So we're going to change it. We have to change it. We have to work on that. That's why this election is important. It's crucial. Not only that we get people elected that are standing for the issues that affect working people, but that we hold them accountable. This Friday, we're bringing a group of people to Kalamazoo called the Nuns on the Bus. Anybody ever heard of the Nuns on the Bus? You know about them, you know about them. This is a group of Catholic sisters from Washington. They run a network. It's an advocacy group for ordinary people, for working people and the poor. And 2 years ago, when we were talking about healthcare reform, they said, we're going to jump on a bus and we're going to go around all the different cities that we can get to and encourage them to fight for better healthcare for ordinary people in this country. And they did that, and they had a lot of success. So this year they decided, we're going to get back on the bus again. And we're going to go to 12 states, critical states, which are swing states. And we're going to try to encourage people to get involved in the election and to force politicians to put on their agenda the issues that affect ordinary people. So they're going to be here this Friday at Martin Luther King Park, which is downtown Kalamazoo, at 2 o'clock on Friday. Come if you can. And then afterwards we're going to have a town hall meeting. And we're going to try to pack that place, and we want people to say, what do you expect from this election? And what do you want government to do? Now that's just one little thing. But things like that have to happen all over the country. We have to restore America to its promise. The promise that all of us are really created equal. That we all do have inalienable rights. And that we believe that this country can get there. We have gone there before, and we can go there now, but not unless all of us work together to get there. Martin Luther King said one time, the day he received the Nobel Peace Prize, he said this in his speech: I have the audacity to believe that people everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their body, culture and education for their minds, and dignity, respect, and freedom for their spirits. That's our challenge, my brothers and sisters. That's what we have to fight for. That's what we want this country to be about, and that is what we're going to fight for from now on. Thank you so much.
I've had the pleasure of seeing in the public. Comes from Leroy McKnight. Step up here, Leroy. See if I do this right. He comes to us through UAW Locals 1373, 1652, 598, and the Union Hall at 659, where he hired in the very building where the 1937 sit-down strike actually took place. Throughout his career, he functioned as committee, person to president, served 3 terms on the executive board and recording secretary, and ultimately the CAP coordinator for Region 1C. In addition to his union offices, he served 2 terms as chairman of the Ingham County Democratic Party, 4 terms of the executive committee of the 8th Congressional Committee, 4 terms on the state central committee of the Michigan Democratic Party. In 2005, he was the only one of nearly 1 million Detroit 3 retirees to initiate legal action to prevent the drastic regulations and change of retiree health care. Many in this room will probably know that. In 2011, he is credited with the unlimited reinstallation of the dental and vision care for retirees. Our retiree group has been on picket lines and working for this public for 20-some years. That was very important. The group in Kalamazoo, which I'm so very proud of, has done many things. It's picketed in many states in the union, brought food, and what Don has just spoke about, we've been there. When there's been a struggle or an injustice to workers, we were there. We are pleased to invite him today. Please join in picking on you. Okay,
Thank you, Pat.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome.
It was limited reinstatement of the dental and health care. So,
Yeah.
or dental and
Yeah,
vision,
it was
so,
limited, okay.
I just make that correction because I don't want to take credit for something I didn't do. Thanks again for inviting me and the Western University, Michigan University, for holding this here today. We really appreciate that. Want to follow up a little bit on Professor Cooney's comment about the inequity. I recently read something that said, democracy works when wealth is in the hands of the masses. And I can't recall the author, and I think it might have been unknown. So you just heard about how it's not in the hands of the masses. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why it's not in the hands of the masses. Obviously, I'm a good, strong union man, and I'm also a Democrat, but some of the things I'm going to say are going to have you questioning whether or not I am. You know, because some of the things that's been going on are a little bit unfair. Let me start by saying I want you all to get familiarize yourself with the Powell Memorandum. The Powell Memorandum was written in 1971, the period just before the end of what we call the good days when we actually made decent money. It was written by Lewis Powell. He was an attorney for the Chamber of Commerce, National Chamber of Commerce, and he, after he wrote it, was rewarded with 2 months later with a Supreme Court justice appointment by President Nixon. I summarized this last year, wrote a little summary of it. It's posted on Workers, Workplaces, and Unions on Facebook. Basically, it was a plan to take on labor and to demean labor at all levels, in the judiciary, the executive branch, and legislative branch, in the media, from the pulpit, and on the campuses. And we've seen that until this day. I also last summer coined a term called Powellist. A Powellist is anybody that promotes, perpetrates anything from the plan of the Powell Memorandum. Those are people who demean us, take away our benefits, reduce our money. Anybody that's guilty of that is a Powellist, according to my definition. There's another guy I'd like you to sort of be familiar with as I talk today, and that's a fellow by the name of Eliot. He's an old-time mathematician, and he said all things that are equal are related. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. Now, I'm here to talk about retiree stuff, but I'm going to bleed over in the second half, so I'm going to tell you something that's going on. First, I'll recap what happened with the VIVA. Some of you know, and some of you may not know. Some of you were in the courtroom when I was one of 2 people cheered in open federal court. Thank you for that. That's really nice. Give yourself a hand if you were in court that day. Were you there? Raise your hand. Nobody? I thought I saw some faces. Well, anyhow, it's kind of nice to have that in my resume as well. But the VIVA, the first thing it did is take away the reimbursement for Medicare. Any of those of you that's on Medicare right now, you would have been reimbursed. That's about $13.50 a year. Then it took away dental and vision. And the dental COBRA came in, then you could pay that, and that's about $600 a year. Now we're $1,950 a year. And then healthcare costs, premiums, deductibles, prescriptions went up another $1,000 or so. At least mine have. We're $2,950. That's just from the VIVA. I don't know how people take away benefits from people on a fixed income to the degree of $3,000, but they did. How they looked themselves in the face in the morning, I don't know. That was approved by the National Bargaining Team, and it was part of the collective bargaining agreement. Our union signed off on that. Let me talk a little bit about pensions. In 2011, they ended the COLA catch-up, otherwise known as our Christmas bonus. That started out as $1,000 a year and wound up $700, and they took that away in 2011. I think some of you remember that. That's another $1,200 on top of the $2,950. $4,150 we're up to. They've taken away in direct costs or direct monies or increased costs from retirees. That's been the result of our union's actions in the last, since 2005, 9 years, just on retirees. There's a couple of things that they haven't taken away yet, so we're still at risk. During the spring of this year, I wrote 3 resolutions. One, please don't increase our dues. Ours was just $1, but everybody else had to suffer under that. They let the numbers be reduced and the wages go down and retirees come under attack, and they didn't care. They just said, yeah, well, have you guys write us a bigger check next time. The thing that's at risk with our pension is, and the other resolutions I wrote, I guess I got ahead of myself. The other resolutions I wrote were that preamble be changed from workers to members, allowing us a say in our destiny for retirees, and that retirees can vote on items exclusive to us. And I wrote those, and they got passed around the country. Okay? They were never seen the light of day at the convention floor. They did not get out of the resolutions committee, and that you can thank the Ruther Caucus for, the people that are in charge of the UAW. At risk is what's going to happen, because in the 2011 agreement, they added language in the pension plan that said that they can de-risk the pension. That means, in so many words, do the same thing to us that they did to the salary people. Take our pension and put it into an annuity. That's coming, folks. Gursky was the VIVA representative, because the VIVA holds so much GM stock, on the board of General Motors. Joe Ashton, the president of, or vice president of Ford for UAW, asked him, should we pull the trigger on pensions? And he said, no. Gursky replied, no, let's wait till 2015. Now, Gursky's no longer the VIVA representative, he's an employee of General Motors, and Joe Ashton is the VIVA representative on the GM board. So 2 members of the GM board right now are saying, or have said, they're going to pull the trigger on pensions in 2015. This is very, very bad, because it takes us out of the protection of ERISA and out of the protection of the Pension Guarantee Trust Board. Really? Yes, it does, really. And this is not a good thing. We have some friends along these lines. Surprisingly enough, it's not the AARP. It's the National Retiree Legislative Network. I encourage all of you to get on their mailing address, and that's at nrln.org, and support them in their efforts to get legislation to stop any company from putting their retirees' pensions into an annuity. If we are not successful, they will come after us next spring and fall. So my push if we're not successful in legislation, will be to ask all of you to contact your representatives and say, don't just put us in an annuity, but have reinsurance on it as well. We saw Lehman Brothers go under. Any one of these companies can go under at any time. Two of them is highly unlikely, especially if they reinsured with somebody like Lloyd's of London that's offshore. Gives us just that much more protection. So I'm going to push for reinsurance of an annuity if we get to that point. But let's try and stop it before then.
So are you saying, Leroy, they should write to someone, what should they do?
First of all, get on the National Retiree Legislative Network Committee, or on their email list, so you're up to speed on what they're doing.
Some of our seniors don't use email.
Okay. Well, it's a website out there, and you can see what they're doing. Just going on nrln.org. I would write your legislators as well and ask them to support the efforts of the Pension Protection Act. It's not formally called that yet, but they expect it to be called that. We talked about a little, we heard some inequity I have to tell you about our pension fund. At the end of 2012, there was $60 billion in it. And all large funds like that are measured by how well they do against the Standard & Poor's 500. And Standard & Poor's 500 went up 30% in 2013. That means that 30% times 60 billion is $18 billion. And my inner circle scoured the quarterly reports and we couldn't find the $18 billion. By happenstance, I was looking at a year-end report that's on one of these, a GM sheet for one of the stockbroker firms. Had a little box in it, said, auto-related profit, $3.4 billion. Non-auto-related profit, yes, $18 billion. Just exactly what the VIBA made, but was pulled out of it before it ever hit the books. That's some inequity, folks. And you'll hear them crying and complaining if they have to put a nickel in, but you didn't hear not one person saying they took $18 billion from that pension fund last year. Not a soul. Yeah, that's some inequity for you. The National Labor Relations Act, you heard a little about that, makes unions accountable for three things. They actually talk about six, but when you boil them all down, it comes down to wages, working conditions, and hours of employment. Now, I want to talk about wages just a little bit. Dennis Williams, before he got elected president the weekend before, said we're going to bridge the gap. We'll hear more about that in a second. And we're also, he also said that we want our members to be able to have a car, a nice house, food and clothing, and put their kids through college. How about that? Yeah, we're going to hear a little more about that as well. So just let me digress a little. A friend of mine said, wait till they find out that labor's a commodity. Everything trades against gold that's a commodity. Has a relative, and then they have spikes, highs and lows. So I got a little curious, I did a little research, and it turned out that the low was in the 30s, just before the 1937 sit-down strike. And the high was just before the Powell Memorandum was written. The high in today's dollars, now I'm not saying that that's what we should be getting, I'm just telling you this is what it was in '69, because I had numbers for those, with $99 an hour in today's dollars. That's why in the 70s, that we talked about earlier, you could buy your car, your house, put your kids through college, have a boat, and have a house on a lake up north if you wanted. Today you can't do that. Now, the new hires that come in, when they hire in a General Motors, are selling their boats and their cars and their houses just to get by. Many of whom qualify for food stamps. 47% of this country qualifies for food stamps. 47% don't make enough money to pay taxes. You hear on the media every day talk about the Powell Memorandum, Powellists, right? Oh, those lazy people. Well, you know what? They're working every day. I'm not mad. You know, they're all worried about Snyder, and I didn't like him taxing me 4%. But the president of UAW, Dennis Williams, is going to take 24% away from active workers. Now you talk about some equity, talk about some inequity. I think that Rick Snyder is a piker compared to Dennis Williams. I don't know where he thinks that wages that are 24% lower than the Great Depression are anywhere near rich. But it's people like you in this room, and thank all 47 of you for coming. With the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening to this. But it's up to you to contact your representatives, contact your union leaders, and tell them, we don't want our pensions taken and put into an annuity. Why didn't you let us vote on something like that? With that, I'll close. Thank you for having me. I hope I gave you some good information to think about. Patty, thank you.
Okay, through our track of 20 years of working for justice, general borders, and different things that happen in the community, we've worked on many, we've been many places. I had the pleasure of meeting Professor William Kaufman, and he seems really like a professor in his mannerism. But he retired from the university. He's a professor of engineering. He's a rocket explosion expert whose research and work has been funded by NASA and the U.S. space program. Today, really, though, he's an enemy of some of the public because they don't understand what he does. I do. Through my association with Professor Kaufman, I was speaking at Lansing when Snyder took over, and they asked me to come. I sat alone. I thought, why was I called here? The League of William Voters asked me to speak about certainly not hurting our retirees. And I believe Grace Bonham, and I think you were with me, weren't you, Mark, that day? And this professor says he wants to talk to me. Well, we've been talking ever since. So, in his studies, he became concerned after he was directed to share sensitive information with the Chinese. I remember that because he carried his card around, and I thought, does he know a lot about it? And then he said, I'd like to go to Washington, D.C. I said, I can take you. Did I not, Professor? Okay, we went. And it was a look on him and some young student from Western Michigan, Jonathan Petro, that said, I want to go to Washington. Can I get in there? And I said, we'll take you. Remember, Mark? So, through all of the stuff we do on a daily basis and with this group, and you've all been in this room with me 20 years, I think, something like that, I tried to think today to tell you what's really going on. I'm not an enemy of a union, as you all well know. I was vice president of postal unions and fought many, many battles, and we never lost. I do not want to run down unions, and I never have. You need to understand that about me. So today I put together a group that I thought would understand, that have trials. And if it's wrong, you go for it. Do not accuse me of being a union buster. I'm not that. I was probably one of the best officials I ever had and never lost a case. Don't like to brag about myself, but I've worked very hard in this community. I respect everyone that's here today. And if you have something wrong, it's like Leroy said, you have to write. It's like Professor Cooney said. You have to look at the candidates. His stats today are very well known. I've only met Leroy twice in my whole life. Today was the second time I heard him speak. But in Lansing that day, when Mark asked me to speak to Professor Kaufman, he said he wanted to go, he did. And the struggle is the same for him. And so I want to, before he speaks, say he has a lot of credibility. He is shunned by the university he worked at. And he talks about his concern for the United States of America. That's where he has my greatest respect. And one day at a lunch, he said, we're going to go see Maddie Marone, who owns the bridge. I said, okay. I was excited about that, because we all know they want to build a bridge. We know the politics. Everything is politics, and it's right about the company ownership of so many things. It's the buying of the soul. And if you know something's wrong, you don't run down the person or the organization unless you fight what's wrong. That's what I stand for, only that. The case in Kalamazoo still sits in the United States Supreme Court for an injustice so grave, and these people have stuck with me for 20 years. And I often said no more. But today I say there is more to do, and so that's why we put this group together. There's a lot of struggle, and we get in those struggles. We saved the paper company downtown with Robert Jones, who was then the mayor. Just one example of how you can do it. They put him on the street. I called Robert Jones, who was the mayor, and I said to him, can we go picket down? Well, I don't usually do that, Pat. So we found out from a student at Georgetown University that Jeff Kors, the beer owner, had bought that plant 6 months before. So some of these people in this room and myself and in West Virginia with Advocate Wilk, we called around and we asked them to go to the bars that weekend and asked them to stop selling or buying Kors beer. 3 days later, the mayor called and said, God, he said, Kors said he's going to take them back, Pat. I'll go down there and march with you to put it in the Kalamazoo Gazette. So you can do anything you want. If you know it's wrong, talk to your family, teach everybody around you, and don't be cold to stand up and fight for what you believe in. I say this today because many of you in this room have been with me for 20 years. I hate the accusation of union buster, but I hate injustice at any level. That's what we stand for. Okay, Professor Kaufman, you can come out, because after that lunch that day, Manny Marone said to me, do you know what's going on? And he gave me a chart. Is it up here right now? On top of where we must close our unions. That was the German way of thinking. That's not ours. And he said, what's happening is the Chinese are bringing in the red barrows through all of the ports in Canada. Did he not, Bill? And he singled them out. So what Professor Kaufman is doing is a little bit what we're doing in this room today. He's trying to get the public aware and not be run down by the university he gave his time and his effort to. Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you very much, Pat. Maybe I'll put this in here and hope that it works. If it doesn't work, please tell me. So good day, brothers and sisters. When I was in high school and worked at the AMP store bagging groceries, I was a member of the union. So I can relate to your wishes, desires, and needs. Before I get into the main subject of my talk, I'd like to talk about two ancillary items that are important to me. One is Governor Snyder wants to exterminate the wolf in Michigan. We have 650 wolves. This is so his pals from China can come over here and do trophy hunting. There will be two issues on the ballot this fall, both of which require a no vote to preserve the wolf. All kinds of underhanded things have gone on. It's interesting that he does not want to eliminate the two-legged wolves that seem to pal around with him. I would support that issue, but not the four-legged variety, which is the predecessor of my husky dogs. The other issue I'd like to bring to your attention is, you know, this past week, NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency, was pretty much trashed for their incompetence over the GM ignition switch issue and other issues. They've been infiltrated by the industry. Well, I had a specific instance in my Ford Explorer where the wheel lugs failed. And the state policeman told me he sees one incident a day. And when you go to the internet, you can find Ford has many wheel lug failures. There's a handout where I wrote up my case, and NHTSA has to be stimulated to take action in this case, because we don't know how, we know at General Motors how many people were killed from the ignition switch. There's probably a similar number of Ford that have failed because of the wheels coming off the cars. So please pay attention to those issues too. But today I'd like to talk about offshoring of work. It's been devastating to our nation. At the top of the pyramid is China. It adversely affects our economy and our security. But we can go down the list: China, Japan, Korea, Bangladesh, Mexico, and on and on. There are bad, bad economic consequences. and defense consequences. Now, I could just overwhelm you with figures on this, but you can go to the internet, and there was a comment made earlier. Demand that the local community college offer internet guide for seniors, where you can go a couple weeks and you can learn, and your grandchildren can help you. Because you have to get on the internet. That's how you can speak these days, and that's how you can get the information that the mainstream media will not tell you, because they are owned by the big corporations. And I had a sitting congressman tell me 2 Friday nights ago that his opponent in the primary was endorsed by major newspapers in Detroit and other cities in Michigan, because the opponent gave $10,000 to $20,000 to the newspapers for their endorsements. So you got to get on the internet to find the truth. Now, regarding what's going on economically, because of offshoring, Coalition for a Prosperous America is a good place to go. The Dayton Daily News, there's a guy in the Dayton Daily News that has meticulously documented the tragedy of the state of Ohio. And you know, these factories have closed, these employees have left, et cetera, et cetera. Manufacturing and Tech News, it comes out every 2 weeks. It is a good place to go too. And then every year the Pentagon publishes a gee whiz report on the state of the Chinese military. They did this for the Soviets too. But you can see, yeah, they have a blue water navy now, because the University of Michigan is giving them a blue water navy. And in the Naval Architecture and Marine Engineering Department, 80% of the faculty and 50% of the students are Chinese communists. Okay, so you can read about, you know, what kind of threat they're posing to us. But for 38 years, the United States has had a trade deficit. Okay, this is the money we're losing. Okay, it's coming out of our high. And right now, we have a $12 trillion trade deficit because of those annual deficits. And currently, we have 18 to 20% unemployment. It's not the 7% bull crap that the government comes out with every night or every month. Okay? Between 2000 and 2010, we've lost 2.5 million jobs. But, oh yeah, when Burger King hires a couple more, that's a big deal, okay? Because no one hired somebody at $25 an hour. They'd rather hire you at $7.95 an hour or whatever ridiculous figure they have. Regarding the Chi-Coms, okay, and that's a term that I learned in the intelligence community, Chinese communist. Right now, our annual trade deficit with the Chi-Coms is about $400 billion per year, right? That's $500 billion, right? And when the right-wing nuts say, well, we're going to balance the budget by slashing your Social Security and Medicare, you know, we're only a little pockmark in the wall made by a BB gun. I mean, they're not worrying about the holes that the artillery shells made, okay? So you got to tell these politicians, quit lying to me. 7 out of 10 Chevys are now made in China. Dan Ackerson is on television, YouTube, saying that General Motors is now a Chinese corporation. Right now, as we speak, the United States Railroads, GATX and Union Tank Car, are going to buy 40,000 new tank cars, because the old ones, when they're filled with this stuff from North Dakota and Alberta, they catch on fire and burn and destroy the downtown of this city and that city. So now we're going to have crash-resistant tank cars. Yeah, we know how to make them. We carried propane. We're going to make 40,000 cars over the next 10 years at $250,000 a pop. You want to know where the components are going to come from? Inner Mongolia, Bow Steel. All right? They're going to ship the domes, the cylinders, etc., up the St. Lawrence Seaway. They're going to be assembled in southern Ontario. Everything except the axle. This is Matty Maroon's story.
True.
And then they're going to be brought across the bridge at Windsor, Detroit,
Yes.
and they're going to put the axles on, and there's going to be a little nameplate that says assembled in America.
In America.
Right? Now, how many jobs do you think that's going to be? And I think it's time that we picket these places that are doing this. Okay? The iPhone was just revealed, okay, and people went out and stood in line. Every year, because of Americans buying the iPhone, there will be a $9 billion trade deficit. Okay? iPhone 6 is going to employ 100,000 new workers in China. Why? Apple's an American company, right? They're in Silicon Valley, but they're a bunch of traders, okay, at best. And we have to stop this. Now, we have people running around saying, support the Keystone XL, American jobs, jobs, yeah. You can dig a ditch and fill it back. Why do you think we're building the Keystone XL? We are going to export petroleum to China. Where do all the pipelines go? They're going to the coast. Why are they going to the coast? So they can load Chinese tankers. And right now, American chemical companies are closing down the ethylene plants in the United States, and they're exporting the ethylene to China to make the plastics. Okay? Again, throwing American workers out of jobs. And the Chinese government 2 weeks ago released a policy statement. They are now going to export their low manufacturing skills, jobs to America because American labor is cheaper and energy is cheaper in America. We are going to make the components which will then be exported back to China where they're going to be assembled into high value products and sold to the world with the Chinese making the products. So isn't that the definition of a third world country? Okay? Yeah. So, and you can find all kinds of data on this. All right. Is clawback possible? Oh, everybody says, well, we're going to bring jobs back to America. Okay. Well, basically, as I found out with regard to the rocket engine that I'm working on now, you know, the Russians have this rocket engine, they've been selling it to us. Why did we buy a Russian rocket engine? Because we couldn't make one of our own anymore. After we made the space shuttle main engine, we got rid of that. It's more profitable, okay, for industry to do other things. So we closed down our capability. And we have to build up the entire infrastructure from graduate student research to skilled tool and die makers to skilled assembly workers to make these delicate structures, okay? And that's across the board. I mean, we've kind of lost our ability, okay? All right, then, that's all right. The people in Washington are in charge, and they're going to address this issue. They're creating manufacturing centers, big grants from NSF, and maybe we have 5 of them around the United States now, where we're going to retrain people with these skills, okay? Well, guess who ends up staffing these centers? Guess? Chinese. It's Chinese graduate students, it's Chinese faculty members. And they say, well, these are the brightest things we can find. Yeah, they go back. American students have been scared out of going into scientific and production machining careers, okay? So why are, and Mary Sue Coleman is on Barack Obama's board of advisors on how to restore manufacturing in the United States. Yeah, okay. Then you get into, what's Wall Street doing? Well, Wall Street's convincing everybody that wealth comes from manipulation of financial assets. We trade on computers in nanosecond intervals and we make billions of dollars for the 1%. Okay? They've brainwashed our political leaders and to some extent the electorate that, hey, you know, having an honest job in a factory where you make something, a turbo pump or a car or a refrigerator, that's not of any value anymore. You want to be a flim-flam artist, you know, like in Monopoly, and buy Boardwalk and put some hotels on it, okay? So that's the path of our nation. We aren't making things anymore that have inherent value. You know, it's a shell game, okay? Well, how did we get here? Okay. Well, it begins in academia, and I saw this in my career. I came to the University of Michigan and started my PhD in 1965. And around me, we had lots of Indians. And then we had lots of Koreans. And then we had lots of Chinese. And fewer Americans. Okay? If you're an American, it's held against you if you try to get into the University of Michigan and many of our other universities. Okay? Right now, as we talk, we have approximately 4,000 Chinese students at the University of Michigan. And they're not studying English and American history and American literature. They're studying science and engineering. And most of them are graduate students, and many of them are Chinese military officers. And we know this. Why do they get visas? It's a very good question. They shouldn't have visas. They're breaking the laws. They regularly break the laws. They're violating ITAR, they're violating the Munitions Act, et cetera, et cetera. But your grandchildren aren't getting into the University of Michigan because somebody from the other side of the Pacific Ocean is getting into the University of Michigan. Okay? So, you know, remember I'm an engineer, and I can offend people, right? I'm not a psychologist or a sociologist. And if the rocket's going to blow up when it's launched, I have to tell you that, okay? So I start looking, and, you know, I mean, obviously we have a systems problem here. Suppose you were the president of Archway Cookies, and every cookie coming out of the conveyor belt was either broken or burned. What would you do? You probably say, oh, I got to adjust something back there and fix this, okay? Well, that's basically our nation right now. Every cookie we're making isn't any good, okay? It's going to go feed the pigs, all right? All right, and we got there. We heard some comments on this previously, all right? I mean, growing up as a kid, I was lucky that I'm the age and was born when I was, okay? Because I wouldn't succeed now. So some significant changes have occurred in our society, okay? Many individuals within the system are corrupt, bought off, and represent interests other than ours. Chinese interests, Japanese interests, okay? Wall Street interests, but not your interests, right? Criminals are not prosecuted and victims suffer, okay? The elite dine on caviar and the downtrodden go hungry, okay? This is really true. It's not what your 9th grade civics teacher taught you. Pat alluded to the trip that we took. Okay? In 2011, we went to Washington, we met about 14 congressmen, House and Senate that day. And we heard some pretty blunt stuff. Like our government has been totally corrupted. All right? Money. Supreme Court decision, right? Do you really think a corporation is a person? I mean, the cows out in the pasture leave things all over the lawn and testify to that. All right? And it really is broke. Okay, if you're not beholden to money, okay, maybe it's a political ideology. Our government is totally infested with worms from Wall Street, okay, and Chi-Com sympathizers. Mitch McConnell's wife, Elaine Chao, her father was in the Long March with Chairman Mao. Okay? All during the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, we heard about the Red Scare. Hey, the Soviets are everywhere, right? We got Pumpkin Papers and Joe McCarthy, and we got book after book about the the Soviet communist infestation of our government. Okay? Paranoia, we executed the Rosenbergs. They were railroaded, okay? I mean, they gave a little piece of paper that big showing the implosion device for the uranium or the plutonium bomb. Now, we have this massive infiltration, and a couple congressmen know about it. And there's one book called The Year of the Rat, and I strongly suggest you get that book. It's about Bill Clinton, okay? And how in 1992 he started taking money from the Chi-Coms. And it just went off the scale. And they're seriously talking about running Hillary for president. Look at their connections to the Chinese. They don't give a damn about you and your kids. They give about, what they care about is the money from China. Okay? So, you know, the system is really broke, okay? It's supporting the oligarchs, the plutocrats, etc. And they maintain this facade. Oh, we'll let them vote and they'll think they live in a democracy. But the people you can vote for are chosen by the party leaders. And these are real scumbags. Okay? They don't care about you. Okay? So we need to make some fundamental changes. Now, when I started to have my awakening and redemption, maybe, first thing I did was go to the unions. All right? I went to the IBEW because I knew some guys there, and there was a guy running for University of Michigan Board of Regents. So I soon figured out I wasn't going to go there and get any results. Then I rang up the UAW, and that didn't get me anywhere, okay? And then I went to the Teamsters. That didn't work either, okay? Even though Matty Maroon's truckers have this big sign on the back of their truck about supporting our soldiers, etc., etc. Okay? So we have a real conundrum, okay? And I think the only way out is a third party, okay? And everybody says, oh, that doesn't work. You're throwing your vote away. Well, we've been throwing our vote away for several decades now. So, I mean, you know, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. All right? And I think we really have to start seriously looking at a third party. Right? And right now, I mean, you can disagree with me on this. Okay. But who are the people out there now that are different? Okay. Well, we have a neurosurgeon from Johns Hopkins who grew up in Detroit with a single mom, Ben Carson, conservative. But he even scares the hell out of the rhinos in the Republican Party. Okay. He is successful. He's published in refereed journals. Okay. He's competent. His patients walk away, lead active lives. Okay. He can figure things out. Then there's Elizabeth Warren. Okay. She almost became head of the Consumer Finance Agency until she was too hot for Obama to handle. Okay. Now you say those people, well, they don't have much in common. One's from the far left and the other's from the far right. Yeah, but there's some things that they agree upon. That hardworking Americans and their kids and grandchildren should have a good life. Maybe they're going to disagree on what the meaning of some verse in the Bible is, or some other thing. But look, we're on the Titanic. All right, we're taking on water. All right, at an inconceivable rate. And we don't want to negotiate over what the orchestra is going to play and how we're going to arrange the deck chairs. All right? Now, I think the word is getting out. Okay? And there are some what we call black swans. I don't know if you've ever heard of black swans. There's a book on it. You can Google it. But a black swan is an event that everybody has not anticipated. Is, oh, that's unlikely. But it has huge, huge consequences. You know, it's like the bat out of hell from left field that you didn't see coming. Well, think about some of the things that are going on. We had Ferguson, Missouri. And there are going to be people who are going to minimize Ferguson, Missouri. Well, they're just lazy, good-for-nothings who are living off welfare. That's not right. These were people who had good factory jobs and were paying for their houses. And they fell upon hard times for reasons not theirs. The police respond, but it's not the police anymore, it's the militia. And as someone who's lived in communist countries for long periods of time, I can tell you about the militia. And in May of this year, since my technical expertise at the University of Michigan. One of the things I did was explosions and weapons systems, interior ballistics, etc. I got invited to a convention in Washington in early May. It was armaments for the police. And they had the Washington Convention Center full of these marvelous toys. I mean, I grew up on a farm, kind of, and had a gun from 5 years old, etc. And you could get anything. You could get belt-fed machine guns, you know, stun grenades, etc. And I stopped at the table for Homeland Security. They have lots of people there, and they come up and introduce themselves, and they give you a brochure. And, you know, you can get this stuff left over from Afghanistan and Iran for free. And I was talking about, you want an alligator vehicle, or maybe just like an armored Humvee or whatever, or we can give you a 50 caliber machine gun. The guy says, hey, how would you like an attack helicopter? Do you have need one of those in your city? He says, we can get you a gunship. No cost to you. Boy, wouldn't that be marvelous? I mean, can't you figure going down Woodward Avenue, strafing the mobs? In America, right? Well, this is nonsense, all right? So I think Ferguson, Missouri was a black swan event. And all of a sudden, the wise guys in Washington are starting to think, well, where else is this going to happen? It kind of happened at the Bundy Ranch, you know, what was that, 9 months ago or whatever. Okay, another black swan event. 2 weeks ago, Friday night in Detroit, there was a screening of a film made by architects and engineers for 9/11. Hour and a half. Well, I'll tell you what the Bureau of Standards put out in their 9/11 report isn't what was shown in that movie. And I urge you to go to their website, Architects and Engineers for 9/11, and look at that. And when they have grizzled New York City firemen standing there, giving an interview, saying, yeah, when we got there, we could hear demolition charges going off. And when you look at the seismograph at Lamont Columbia Geophysical Observatory, and you see a massive ground shock 5 seconds before the first airplane hit the building. And when you look at the collapse of building number 7, which is at 3:30 in the afternoon, and no airplane ever hit it, something's rotten in Denver. And then, you know, this is the 50th year of the Warren Commission. Next month in Bethesda, Maryland, there is a huge meeting on the Warren Report. And I have seen some of the stuff from the grassy knoll. It's very compelling. Okay. So is the Warren Commission report a fairy tale? May well be. Okay. And then the final black swan I will bring up is climate change. Okay. This past week was the 100th anniversary of the Aero Department at the University of Michigan, and we had various functions, including presentations. General Electric, Boeing, Pratt & Whitney all gave papers on the effect of their aircraft engines on the global warming. They have concluded it's true, and beginning now, they are only going to work on biofuels. They're going to grow seaweed, they're going to turn it into kerosene, which eventually becomes CO2, which is converted back into seaweed, etc. Closed cycle. And about 2 weeks ago, a huge paper was published on the melting of the Antarctic ice cap. It is huge too. I mean, it's real. Okay? I mean, maybe justifiably, in 50 years, the lower half of Manhattan and the financial district will be underwater, and we finally get them, because our attorney generals will not get them. So I would urge you in conclusion to think out of the box. Raise hell. You cannot go up to your Congress or Senate or
I think they basically, can everybody hear me?
Get a little closer.
I think basically everything to be covered has been covered, except for some, has everybody, I like to make everybody think for themselves instead of having the news and all the one-sided arguments tell you what you're supposed to believe, what you're supposed to think. I think that's summed up by the picture over there with Adolf Hitler, to where they dictated what to do and we had a major world war over that. And I think that's what our government and your union is doing to you now, is saying this is the way it's going to be. We'll make your decisions. We know what's best for you. How's that worked so far for you guys? There's many similarities. I've listened to the politicians, I've listened to the union, definitely listened to the people that are much smarter than me in the education field. Just like you guys, I've worked my whole life. Came from a family, my mother was a teacher, dad worked on the railroad. I was in the union, mom was in the education field. The only thing I've always seen similarity is life seems to go in circles. When we had the unions building this country, it was a right-to-work country. There was no such thing as right-to-work states. They came in and they made equality in the workplace. They made fair wages, better places to work. Their whole thing was, we want to make a better life for the children the whole way through. Unions are still greatly needed, but how many of you feel that the unions in the big glass building in Detroit or the Teamsters headquarters or wherever, raise your hands if you think that's the union? How many of you feel you are and were the union that needs to come back and take charge of things for your own benefit, your own kids, your own everything else? I've been called a union buster all the way across. I've been called by the government, some of them have called me a homeland terrorist because I excite riots. I guess I do. I'm trying. My job today is to fire you guys up, make you remember that you are the people. Whether you are the people that are voting, whether you are the people that are the union members that are trying to make a fair wage, raise a family. There's no more pensions. Your kids aren't going to have anything. We don't have the old money to keep handing everything down. Somebody needs to wake up and fight for everything and say, hey, it's got to stop now. Or we're going to be looking up to Mexico. We're going to be looking up to all the other countries saying, hey, can we come down here and get a job? If there's nothing left here, and if we don't go after the politicians and go after everybody else, my only difference with the politicians' opinion is we can fix it. You're not going to fix it by voting for anybody that's made 6, 7 digits a year. You need to vote for the people that are in your situation. They've worked their way up through it. They've made $20,000, $50,000, $70,000 a year. Now don't think they're going to be perfect. You're going to find so many skeletons in their closet, but you won't have to, because the politicians putting up the $2 million will tell you every skeleton in their closet. So the only thing I can tell you for advice, whether it be for union officials or all the way up, remember the UAW and all the other union places and all the other union agencies will keep telling you, this isn't your fight, stay out of it. We've got your back. This isn't your fight, stay out of it. If you get involved in this, they'll close you down. Didn't they do it anyway? Don't fall for their lies, whether it's the politicians or the other ends. And the bottom line with the politicians is, if there's no skeletons in your closet, no bones, no problems, everybody gets too hung up on, I'm a Republican, so I've got to vote Republican. I'm a Democrat, the Democratic candidate's got to be the best. I think it should be like when you elect a judge. Throw your party affiliation out the window. Find who agrees with what you want and what you believe in the most. Not even allow them to tell what party they're affiliated with. And then we can get our country back. But vote for the one that made $20,000 to $100,000 a year, because they know what it's like for their mother to not have prescription drugs if you don't go buy it for them because they can't pay for it with Social Security. The millionaires that get their $400,000 or $300,000 a year after 2 terms in office does not understand your problems. Vote for real people like you that have imperfections, and we can get the country back as well as the union. Thank you.
Today it was a split in the division. What was going on? There's some people that are having some struggles, and we had with us this afternoon, we kept the people that are involved in some litigation in the back at their request. They're trying to fight the best they can. They will tell you one-on-one that they're disappointed. And sitting next to me today is a lady that came to the law firm in Michigan, and the attorney here that has been assisting these people is Jonathan Browning. Just stand up and take a bow, Jonathan. I have to tell you about this man. You think the professor had problems with me. I came in November of last year and I said I need some help and I need it right now. The government ordered me to get a lawyer. And so, am I correct, Jonathan? So Mr. Dodge's son took it, and then Jonathan took over, and ever since he doesn't have any life. But there's a reason for that, because some of those people are here today to explain their case. And the injustice that I can't stand, and I'm not a union buster, gets very aggravating when we put books out to prove what we said and work. And this group in this room, I've known for 20 years. We're glad you're here. But you have to let your children, and it's just like Professor Cooney said, you look for the person that's going to do the job, and you make them accountable. Look at the hours and times he spent in the public. And dollars dominate. We need to stop that. So I get a call to my office, or to my phone number, and Lori calls me, and she's from Flint, Michigan. And I said to her, what can I do for her? And she came and told us what was going on. And all I can say is, she'll tell you the road's rough, right, Lori? When she looked at the book, I had never met her, and talked about the injustice and what was going on. Attorney Browning and I knew exactly what was going on, so we listened, and she brought another person with her. Interesting about what I have to say to you today is about a justice issue. Those people that meant good in that plant and that know her didn't show up today. And they didn't because they're either afraid of their jobs or they were lied to. And lying doesn't fit in the pattern for us at all. And you people here are waiting for the United States Supreme Court. They take their time, okay, as you all know, for 20 years. So if you leave this room today and you talk to your family and you talk to everybody around you, and it's like Earl said, are you any better off or you're not scared, okay? I applaud Lori for coming and hope she'll continue today after she leaves here, because there's so much needed to be done. It's like Leroy said. I did not know what Leroy was going to tell you today. I knew he dealt with retirees. I know this is one of the greatest retired groups I've ever seen in 20 years. We've been in these locals he talks about. We've been in other states. And like the downtown factory we saved because of your picketing and because of Robert Jones, we made the difference. So we say to make the difference today. That's the main reason for this. But I want Lori to leave here today to know that she's starting first and probably scared to death. A husband that says, no, don't bother. I've heard I don't bother for a long time. We've been thrown out of bigger places, but we've been accepted saving plants in the UAW General Motors. You have people now, today, that didn't come, but asked a letter to be read about what they need to do, what's happening in Toledo Jeep. The professor was correct when he said, I don't think I can get to Washington. We spoke with Marcy Captor. I was asked by many networks who I trusted in Washington, D.C. I gave a name, Marcy Captor. We made videos with her. We've marched with her. We've talked to her. But she's now recently been told there's an election coming up. She can no longer speak. Okay? That's what they've done to us, and that's what we need to change. So, Lori, I want you to say what you think. We're going to leave you out of here today hoping you can continue with what you're doing. Go ahead. Every day for 21 years. And so I really applaud these speakers. I did not coach any of them. I hope you want to all agree to that, gentlemen. Okay. But people that came from the other plants today, I had several calls coming in, and just before we entered this room, Detroit News called me. And just one little thought about you can make the difference, as did Robert Jones did. And the student that called me from Georgetown University to say, Jeff Kors bought that company. And I said, okay. So we did. We tromped up and down the streets, but many people are scared to do that. Lori came under some critical conditions today. The plant and her own family says you don't want to stand up, and God knows I praise her because I said that 21 years ago too, but I'm still standing up. So back to basics. I hope you all understood today had to be, because the Detroit News says they're going to do a corruption series or help to make it better for retirees. Leroy told me things today I didn't know, but I know that this retiree unit in Kalamazoo has suffered long and picketed long and been in many states to help many people. And so I think justice is what we have to do, and I think you need to stand up and be counted. I don't know that that's, I've always said to our group when we finish a meeting, you have to tell your families and your neighbors. But there was such division for all of you, I understood it. But you're still standing, and we still need to fight. And I think we can. So of all the units, especially now over at Chrysler and her plant in Flint, Michigan, all know the truth, and they all get together. I think you can stand up and work. This is the group that stood behind us for a long time, Laura. So I think that's about all. And we promised if you had any questions of these speakers, we said we'd be here till 4. If you have any questions at all you would like to ask these speakers at all, feel free to. I think they covered a lot, but, okay, yes.
Have you guys looked into anything about the retirees that were hurt on the job and that and lost their work comp, most of their work comp?
No, no one's asked me to look at that issue about retirees specifically. Oh, yeah, thank you. No one has asked me to address in a legal manner any retiree issues. The people that we've dealt with in our lawsuit have all been workers at several plants that were from a company called ACH, which was more or less a subsidiary of Ford. So these address plants out in the eastern part of the state. It's really kind of a separate issue, but if there's something there that needs addressing, I'd certainly be willing to
There's a lot need to be addressed on it. There's a lot need to be addressed on how they bargained for it for one reason, how they got to bargain for it.
Okay. Okay, well, what was the situation there?
Well, we, some of us that got hurt on the job and they made us retire early on the job. We, 2 years ago, come January 1st, we lost our work comp that we were supposed to get like 85% of it. And what they did is that UAW let them come in and bargain on a retiree that's already retired and have that benefit, and said, oh, now it's okay for you to take away that benefit and give them only what it is for what they made.
I'm not sure that Jonathan can answer that, because his situation, when the government sent me the letter, which came right from the top, Pat Fox from Labor Department, they worked with us for a long time. And she said she gave it to an investigator in Michigan. And
putting on the industries. That's shutting the jobs out of the United States right now. The coal coming out of the ground, dirty, can't use it, shut them down. That's causing a job. Who wants to buy the coal? China. Yeah. So, our coal mines are down. Is the EPA doing something like that smelting company, the last smelting company we had in the United States, in Texas, shut it down because they couldn't meet the EPA rules. So, China's going to make our lead for our ammunition now. So,
He's telling you that it's true.
is that part of why the jobs are leaving, is because of the stringent rules the government has put out on us?
Well, I would say you have to think out of the box.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm somewhat familiar with the coal industry because I've investigated quite a few mine explosions. Coal mining is a terrible job. And the last mine explosion was Upper Big Branch, killed 30 coal miners because the company did not properly ventilate the mine and because it was full of coal dust. And right now, black lung disease is at its highest level in years because of what industry is doing. I would say that actually we're creating new jobs. And the coal miners in West Virginia should be learning how to make wind power and solar power devices. These are coming. The Chinese are making them. They're making profits off of them. But our government is too stupid to enter into retraining. And also the coal industry, titans, are too stupid to be investing in clean energy, okay? With regard to lead emissions from a factory. Well, we can put the bag houses on and lots of other things. The problem is, for years, industry, like Dow Chemical up in Midland, has been throwing their crap in the river. I mean, we have the products of Agent Orange that got dumped into the Tittabawassee River. They knew better. It was poisonous. Okay, but that cuts into their profits. All right, you can find bright young people who can solve all the problems. Okay, now if you move your factory to China, doesn't matter. What's the life of a Chinese worker? 5 cents, something like that. So it doesn't care whether he has black lung, lead in his blood, or whatever. Okay, so we just demand excellence from EPA.
So what you're just saying, we can't clean the code and make it short. So, we can't get clean coal. That's so we're not.
Well, yes, I mean, there's certain things you can do in coal burning power plants that make things better. I mean, look, I mean, you know, the fly ash doesn't cover the neighborhood anymore because we have precipitators and stuff on it, okay? It doesn't matter to the plant whether it's burning natural gas or coal. And of course, the natural gas has a lot of hydrogen in it, which doesn't contribute to greenhouse.
Yeah, that's right, you know, it's 8 times more expensive than coal. Is that right?
Well, now wait once. Expensive, all right? In aeronautical engineering, you learn about the conservation laws and control volumes, all right? Now, the reason coal is so cheap is you can blow up miners, you can give them black lung disease, and it has no consequences because the coal company has canceled the insurance for their retirees, etc. Okay, so when you say it costs more, but you don't get black lung disease from it, okay, and you don't die in an explosion, so it's actually pretty cheap.
John, what was your question?
You mentioned Germany. They're going to keep on, their coal's on the surface, they're dragging it off, so they don't have a whole lot of lung disease there, it's run in with belts.
Well, Germany right now is converting. They've shut down all their nuclear reactors. They're closing down their coal mines because they're going to hydrogen and wind energy. Merkel's a PhD scientist. She's probably the brightest politician in the world.
And then another one on this. Oh yeah, there's a lot of real bright ones out there, but.
No, only Angela Merkel.
But anyway, how come we're bringing 30% more of our beef now in from Argentina to the United States?
Because it's cheaper. You know, I mean, you know, the gauchos down there don't get as much as a guy out in Colorado. Okay? And yeah, and you can cut it up and process it all in Argentina and bring it here frozen. Same with orange juice. Orange juice is coming from Brazil. Okay? So, you know, why are we doing all this stuff? I mean, why? Because the fat cats on Wall Street in the short term can make more money.
China's already phasing out the dollar, that's the reason why.
So see, he's not hurting the worker there because the cattle rancher owns his cattle himself. It's his business. So it's not the government interfering with that right there.
Well, I mean, the government interference is a two-edged sword. And look at it. I mean, just don't blindly go after EPA and say they're the bad and evil. In 1973, I distinctly remember being in Denver because we were going on vacation. And you couldn't see across the street because of the brown air. And that was good for my lungs? I don't think so. Okay, we came along with catalytic converters and better controls on the engine system. And I go to Denver now, and hey, you can see across the street. I think that's desirable. And look at what went on in Toledo a couple weeks ago with the water in the lake. Okay, they couldn't drink the water. Why couldn't they drink the water? Because they had this stuff that was making poison. Why do we have this stuff in the lakes? Because the CAFOs, the big animal feeding operations in Lenawee County and in Ohio are dumping tons and tons of raw manure and phosphorus from the fertilizer into the lake because the state farm lobby has bought every vote in Lansing and is controlling the state EPA and the state legislature that says, hey, when the ground is absolutely frozen in January and February, we don't care if you dump thousands of gallons of liquid sewage on the land and it immediately runs into the Raisin River because you've just contributed to our campaign.
So you're saying they're all criminals then?
Well, pretty much. Pretty much. Okay.
Well said,
How
Tom.
we get the guys to go up and eliminate them one at a time?
Well, that may happen. I mean, Mark, don't worry about the 4th of July. Worry about the 14th of July, which is Bastille Day.
When you go by Germany, you'll have to take that out of mind. I've got too many relatives.
Any other questions? Yeah. Harland.
Yeah, I'd like to know why, when the illegal Mexicans come over, they do something about it. You gotta have a green card to be a citizen. Why don't the Chinese have to do it? Why don't the Japs have to do it? Why can't they come over? Any damn reason they wanna come over.
Well, Snyder just made a deal with the Chinese. If you invest $1 million in the state of Michigan, he'll get you a green card. Okay, or look what's going on in the real estate market now with downtown Detroit. Who are the big movers and shakers in buying up the distressed properties? Chinese.
I had an experience with the damn Chinese doctor. He damn near killed my wife and I.
Well, there's some Korean War veterans who had experiences with Chinese too.
Right now, China is trying to phase out the dollar bill right now. They do not want the dollar bill there. So that means when they phase that dollar bill out, what's going to happen to our economy? Because we always produce we can produce $1 million a day just because we got the paper to print it on. Within another year, I got a guy that I listen to a lot, and I make a lot of money on him. And he predicts within a year that our economy is going to have another big fall because China's phasing out the dollar. So,
There's a lot of stuff like that, though, you hear. I'm not sure about that.
I'm serious. They are. They're phasing it out.
EPA says you can't burn coal, but you can burn dollars.
Okay, here.
Leroy would like to address that.
Yeah, the Chinese executive order NC-0201 is what you're talking about. They're going to phase out the dollar bill, and that's been an ongoing process for a while by the BRICS. I don't know if you're familiar with the BRICS. I'm going to tell you Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And they just brought Argentina in by giving them an $11 billion loan to sort of hold them up, shore them up, and get them more amenable over there. And they're going to start, they are already trading between themselves with their dollars for gold and oil and things. We have what's called the petrodollar. The $100 bill is called the petrodollar, and that's where all commodities are traded in dollars right now. It is the world currency. They have to come and go to our markets, our commodity markets. And they have to buy $1 before they buy any of the commodities. Well, that gives us an advantage, an unfair advantage, quite frankly, that they got to buy the dollar. It keeps propping up our dollar. Well, the real worry is that sometime real soon they're going to stop buying the dollar in order to buy commodities. Thank you. And then that will be the end of the petrodollar, and that's what you're talking about. The crash probably coming not too far down the road.
1 year.
Well, however long. And nobody's got a crystal ball, but it's coming. It is coming. We have had fiat money and now digital money for far too long. Typically, so that you all know, fiat money lasts about 35 years. That's money that isn't backed by gold or silver or something like that. 35 years. We're 42 right now into this. The only thing that's saving us is the petrodollar, or we wouldn't have this little euphoria that we have going on. I want to address something also that the gentleman asked here a minute ago about why the jobs left. In 1988, I was told that you can buy a American or a foreign car 32% cheaper than you can buy an American car. And that's because of the workers. And I was working next to people just like you that were getting Charlie horses from working too hard in the plant. Charlie horse is caused by working too hard. You sweat too much and you get a Charlie horse. It's that simple. And we've all probably had one. And I said, I don't think anybody else is working any harder than we are to make these products different, priced by 32%. Across the board, 32%. It wasn't one industry here and there. It was everything. So I started looking into it. I went to the basement. There was no internet. I went to the basement of Michigan State University and I started doing some studying. And the result that I came up with was a tax imbalance. In 1982, Reagan sent a team of people to Mexico City that encouraged the other G6 countries and all emerging countries to go to a sales tax. And they did, in whole or in part, go to a sales tax. The worst one, quite frankly, is the UK. They got a horrible tax structure. But they did this because they thought we were doing too bad. And men like Greenspan and Jack Welch were down there, both of whom, 6 months after they retired, subsequent to their retirement, which was different times, both wrote an article or a letter saying, globalization as we intended it did not work, and for that we apologize. Now I'm going to tell you about the globalization that they did for us. we have a payroll withholding sales tax, or payroll withholding tax. And that's one cost of government built into the product. If we send it over to Germany, at the time it had a cleaner tax, they added 17% to it. It was 49. We had two costs of government on it. In Germany, they sell their car and it'd be baseline 10,000 just like ours, and it'd be 11,700. They put through 17% on it. When they export it, okay, now remember, we had one cost of government here. Ours had two over there, and they had one there. When they exported, it didn't get sold. And we don't have any sales tax on it like they do. Came over here with zero cost of government. That's why you could buy a foreign product, no matter what, for 32% less. Now, what happened behind that was that as we bought our pocketbooks, and you saw our friends and neighbors buying Hondas and Mitsubishis and all kinds of things, sometimes it wasn't a car, it was actually a TV, Mitsubishi. Made in America, by the way, but they bought them. And as we did that, the jobs got generated overseas. Our jobs diminished, and they got generated overseas. More and more and more, to the point where we lost 89% of our manufacturing jobs in this country are gone. And of those jobs, people like Gettelfinger and Bob King, in 2007, drove down the wages of manufacturing in this country by 50% when they come in and cut the wages for the new people. Now what that meant, getting off a little bit, then now you know why they left the country, but when the wages went down, didn't just go down for the Detroit 3, they went down for companies that made Angel Soft, Brawny, they also, Georgia Pacific, those wages went down too. But the difference got turned into pure profit for those business owners. The three products I just mentioned are companies making those products owned by the Koch brothers. So everybody crying about the Koch brothers ought to worry about the union leaders. I mean, if I was a Koch brother, I'd make sure that Ruther Hawkins got elected every time, because they keep driving wages down and giving me more profit. The answer to the Koch brothers isn't a boycott. It's raising wages to the point where they're not getting those profits again. So now you know why the jobs left, 89% of them. We got 11% left. General Motors labor cost is 7% of what it was in 1985. I have those numbers. 7% of what it was in 1985. And it's going to go down even more with what they're about to do to us. So, having said that, I'll give the microphone back to Patty. So, thank you for indulging me.
One of the other things is I listened to all the speakers today and what we know, just a little situation that you could talk about all the time. We do talk about in our house a lot, to the grandchildren, etc. Some of them in their 20s now. Received a phone call 2 weeks ago, and the granddaughter said, Graham, she's working in a hospital, and she said, our computers are down. And I said, and what'd you do? She said, you'd be proud of me, Graham. I went to the head of the hospital and said, do you know where those computers are coming out of? And she said, no. She said, India. So she called me in. I said, well, do something about that. And she said, well, just recently, a church affiliate bought it. So I found out who it was. And so the next day I called the affiliate, and so did she. She got a plaque for recognition, but her bottom line was, as this nurse was, my grandma says, and I learned from my own family what's wrong. And when you call now to a credit card company or anything, you can ask to speak to an American person. General Novak, my brother-in-law, always says, when they get me, they're done. And you need to do that. And you need to get the names of people. But I'm so proud. So if you listen in your family, you do what's really justice, you can get it done. And like I said to Lori today, we've already got a strategy on what to do with they're doing with people. So that's what you have to do. You don't have to be soothsayers and say, well, they're not doing anything, or she's not doing her job. We've been fighting for this for years. Well, it was they who put us where we are, and it's us that have to make the change. And like, it's just like Professor Cooney said, you have to look at who's doing what. And I think Professor Kaufman, I always thought he's really the real professor that knows everything when I traveled with him. But he's genuine in what he said. When he talked about a third party, I didn't know he was thinking about that, but I do know today what he's thinking about. But he has the right to say what he thinks. And if everybody in this world, because I'm really mad now after all these years, that says I'm a union buster, shoot them for me, okay? I want to thank you all for coming, and we hope you've learned a